This isn't about remaining in the European Union. There'll be some people genuinely who are thinking, why can't there be, and I'm not saying what's right or wrong here, but why can't there be an open debate about the single market, about the customs union, without this government trying to shut it down?
Well, the debate has been taking place non-stop in the run-up to and since the referendum.
But it doesn't feel like it is now, though, does it?
Well, because I think people have moved. I think people have moved on. The country's moved on. The EU's moved on. And let me tell you, not just here but in Brussels, there is no appetite to relitigate those arguments, to reopen things that have been settled. Actually, it's about a new.
The damage is great.
It's about a new friendship.
Your own green paper says investment is reduced by 11% because of Brexit.
There's no doubt that what we warned about in advance of the referendum in terms of the impact on economic growth has come to pass, and that's a fact of life we have to deal with.
This is now just getting ridiculous. How can we talk about growth and the need to fill a £22 billion black hole, which will likely need to be filled with tax rises and cuts to public services, whilst refusing to acknowledge and discuss the fact that by almost every economic and financial measure, Brexit has been disastrous for the UK.
The Centre for Economic Reform claims the government has lost out on £40 billion in taxes because of the damage done to the country's output by leaving the European Union.
Now, of course, the pandemic and Russia's illegal war in Ukraine has had an impact on the UK's economy, as has rising energy prices. But Bloomberg has calculated that Brexit, which has been entirely self-inflicted, is costing the UK £100 billion a year in lost output. That's roughly £40 billion less for the new Labour government to invest in the UK. Just think about that. It's £40 billion less to invest in our hospitals and our schools and our public services that we all rely on. If you want to know more about the economic damage Brexit is inflicting on the country, just switch on a news channel.
Now, businesses say they feel like they're banging their heads against a brick wall over improving trade with the European Union. That's according to the British Chambers of Commerce, which says its members are still struggling with the UK's post-Brexit trading arrangements.
There were figures published just before Christmas, which you probably saw. The Brexit has cost the government £40 billion a year in lost tax revenue. What, as a very leading businessman, what has the impact of Brexit been on business generally in the UK?
It's been catastrophic.
What we've experienced over the last decade and more has been partly self-inflicted, without question. Brexit, without doubt, has made us poorer than we otherwise would have done.
The UK economy as a whole has been permanently damaged by Brexit. It's reduced the economy's potential output significantly, eroded business investment. I mean, look, if we hadn't had Brexit, we probably wouldn't be talking about an austerity budget this week. The need for tax rises, spending cuts, wouldn't be there if Brexit hadn't reduced the economy's potential output so much.
Economically, the UK would have been better staying in, wouldn't it?
I don't think that for a moment. But what I do think...
Based on all that?
But what I do think is we haven't actually benefited from Brexit economically.
How much longer can our politicians deliberately avoid the negative impact of Brexit in their list of things which have battered and continue to batter the UK economy? The OBR, that's the Office for Budget Responsibility, says Brexit will reduce the UK's potential GDP by 4% in the long run by lowering the trade intensity of the economy. Goldman Sachs puts it at 5%. And the National Institute of Economic and Social Research calculates it at up to 6%. These analyses chime with that of the Bank of England by showing that a long-term squeeze on the country's economic potential from Brexit is playing out as they had feared. And just a month before the general election was called, things got even worse.
8 years after the Brexit vote, cheques that have already been delayed 5 times finally arrive at the UK border. From today, European food and plant imports considered at risk of carrying disease will face inspection. But industry says adding checks will increase food inflation by adding costs for importers and consumers.
We think there's going to be £1 billion worth of extra cost put onto food coming through Dover Port alone. So restaurants, delicatessens, fish and chip shops could well be affected by what's currently happening today. And the consumer, in the very near future, will start to see some of those food products going up in price.
When Britain was in the EU, food and the people who made it could move freely into the UK, but a hard Brexit means friction at the border. A wide variety of foods, including cheese, cured meat, will now face inspection, adding cost, delay and bureaucracy.
Until we have an honest and open discussion about the negative impact of Brexit and take steps to remedy it, Britain's growth, productivity and living standards will continue to be weighed down by the structural handicap of Brexit. How does the country just move on from that whilst politicians refuse to even acknowledge it? UK business is now being crucified by the additional red tape and extra costs created by Brexit. And if all that isn't bad enough, the Resolution Foundation has cited the economic effects of Brexit as one of the factors which have acted to suppress wage growth. If the new government is serious about honesty in politics, we now need to have a proper, grown-up conversation about all of this. We have to look again at the frictions and trade barriers Brexit has created. And we need to do it urgently for all the small and medium-sized companies that are the backbone of British business. They're trying to export to the EU, and because of the huge amount of paperwork, changing regulations and extra costs, many are giving up. Every week we're losing growth and trade with the EU, and that just cannot go on.